So recently I've had a few people ask me if I can make a video talking about my manifestation journey, how I found manifestation, and starting from a student of the law of attraction to finding Neville Goddard and his teachings, and how I got to where I am today, where I can confidently say without hesitation that I am living the most incredible life that I would have never thought possible. And I felt moved to talk about this and share this with all of you because one thing that I want to get across, and hopefully something that is picked up, is that my journey was not always the smoothest ride. In fact, there were a lot of challenges and frustrations and many times where I almost gave up entirely. And I think it's important to share this and be as real and open and honest with all of you who on your own journey might be having difficulties with faith and struggling with double-mindedness, because I think it's a really common conception to think that for some people we just manifest so easily. I have talked to numerous people where they've said to me something along the lines of, yeah, well, Missy, I know it comes easily for you. I know it's super easy for you. You're the master at this. First and foremost, master is a particularly strong word, but more importantly, this has not always been an easy go of it. So I think if you guys have a real and honest and raw account of somebody who went through all the peaks and valleys that you could possibly imagine, that will hopefully give you some motivation and encouragement to see that just because it might be difficult now does not mean it is always going to be. So today we're going to talk about my own personal journey and my testimony with the law of assumption and how I went from somebody who was at the lowest and worst point of their life to somebody who is now living an incredible life that I would have never thought would be possible. So before we dive in, I think it might be helpful if you guys have a little bit of backstory about me, because growing up was not easy, to put it nicely. I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. I am comfortable talking about this now because I do not resonate with this story. This was very much the old story, but for the purpose of sharing this account, I'm going to be as real as I can with you guys. I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. There was a lot of struggle, and that was all I knew from the time that I was born. My dad worked 7 days a week for years to provide for us. But nonetheless, we still barely scraped by, and it was tough. And due to the stress and the fact that they were exhausted, my parents fought constantly. It was not a happy home. And so I say that to say, growing up, I did not form the healthiest of self-concepts. I had a lot of fear, I had a lot of anger, I had a lot of resentment. I was left alone a lot of the time from a very young age. I always felt abandoned and like I wasn't prioritized. So of course, this shaped and molded me into somebody that was deeply insecure and deeply angry and fearful. So needless to say, adolescence and early adulthood were not easy. For the first handful of years of my adult life, things rapidly spiraled out of my control. I went through a string of terrible relationships with men who treated me like garbage. I was abused, I was cheated on, I was rejected, I was always left for somebody better. As far as work and money was concerned, I was constantly struggling to make ends meet. Growing up in a household that was bordering on the line of poverty, I was very much in a state of scarcity and never having enough. I suffered from extreme anxiety, panic disorder, depression, and I was so angry at life and the world and the unfairness of it all. Why was it that so many people have it so easy, but here I am trying to be a good person, genuinely trying to work hard and be kind and do all the right things, and I was constantly falling flat. I could never get ahead. I could never get the things that I wanted. And this led to me starting to drink heavily. I struggled with addiction. It felt like pure hopelessness and despair. It got to a point where I remember being so depressed and felt so hopeless that one night I seriously sat and considered just ending it all. And that night was my first real wake-up call. I realized then that something had to give, something had to change. I had to do something to try to get things back on track or to get my life into a better place, because the way that I was going was not sustainable. So this led me to seek self-help resources. I started trying to find out things about relationships and bettering oneself. I tried yoga, I tried meditation, which at first I did not take to at all. And it was around this time that I first found the concept of manifestation through the book called The Secret. Yes, like most people, I first discovered the law of attraction. And I remember being fascinated at this concept, this idea that we have the power to change our life through the way that we think. I was so curious, and at the same time, highly skeptical as well. Another piece of context that's helpful to note is that I have always been more of an analytical person. I've always been somebody that is very practical-minded, very interested in the science and the proof of things. So I was both parts intrigued and hesitant. This was a common type of inner battle that I've had, because on the one hand, always being a more left-brain person, a more logic and reason kind of person, I had at different points in my life experienced things that I could not explain. Mystical, almost esoteric kinds of experiences. So I read the book and I watched the documentary, and I remember thinking to myself, you know what? I really have nothing to lose here, because things genuinely did not seem like they could get any worse. They could only go up from here, so it doesn't hurt to give this a shot. And so I started to look for anything I can get my hands on relating to the law of attraction. I bought dozens, if not hundreds of books, watched hours upon hours of videos from different authors and teachers, Esther Hicks, Joe Dispenza, Bob Proctor, Louise Hay. I just absorbed all this information like a sponge. I just became more and more fascinated. I read the accounts of other people and their success stories. In the first time, as long as I could remember, I started to feel a little glimmer of hope. So I dived right in and started to put into practice everything that I had been learning. I made a vision board. I started using my affirmations. I tried to keep myself in that high vibe state. I would script. I tried every technique under the sun. You name it, I've tried it. And this went on for several years. I was a student of the law of attraction for the better part of a decade. And the results were kind of a mixed bag. I would manifest some things, but others I would never see even a hint of. And I grew increasingly frustrated as the years went by, because it seemed like no matter what I did, no matter how much I affirmed, no matter how much I visualized or tried to keep myself high vibe, I was still seeing very inconsistent results. And for the things that did manifest, a lot of times I would end up losing them again. And it went on like this for years and years and years. And there were so many times in that period where I wanted to give up. There were a few times where I did give up, but I always found myself coming back to it, because it was one of those things where I would see just enough proof to keep me engaged and keep me going, but yet it still remained very inconsistent. And I grew more increasingly burned out as the years went by. And the biggest and greatest success that I had with the law of attraction would have to be my person. A couple of months before I met my specific person, I had written out a list of all the characteristics, all of the traits and qualities that I was looking for in a partner. I was more doing this just for fun than anything else. I wasn't really even trying to manifest it. It just felt really good to write it out. And then I put it away and genuinely forgot about it. And sure enough, ended up meeting my person just a few months later, which that became a whole journey and roller coaster in and of itself. But overall, it was still very inconsistent. A lot of times I would wind up getting very frustrated, and I would often reach burnout and quit, only to find myself coming back to it, and the cycle continued for years. And this went on until about 2015, 2016-ish. I'm terrible with timelines, forgive me. When I stumbled across Neville Goddard. The first time I found Neville was actually several years prior, in 2012. But at the time, I was kind of turned off by the excessive use of scripture and quoting up the Bible. I was very much agnostic, wasn't religious, so that really rubbed me the wrong way. Knowing what I know now about how Neville taught from the Bible, that it is supposed to be taken figuratively and not like a literal biography, had I understood it back then, I likely would have gotten into Neville a lot sooner. But I digress. I came back around to Neville Goddard again in 2015, 2016, after I had one of the most incredible mystical experiences I've ever experienced. And this led me to looking for answers and seeking out what had just happened to me. And this is where I came across Neville's book, The Law and the Promise. And this time, when I started to read that book, I remember vividly like this electric feeling starting to move through my body. Something was igniting on a cellular level. I was resonating so much with what Neville Goddard was saying. And it felt like I finally had that light bulb moment. So much of what he was teaching was actually making sense to me. It was as though there was something much deeper within me that was telling me, keep going. This is it. At the same time, I was also battling through one of the most difficult periods of my life. When I say that I was at rock bottom at this time, that is no exaggeration. When I found Neville, I was in one of the darkest and lowest points of my entire life. The love of my life had left me a handful of months prior. I was severely depressed, barely leaving my room. My work performance was garbage. I felt like I did not have any strength or motivation to keep going. So these teachings found me at the most perfect time possible, because for the first time in what felt like years, I had that spark of encouragement, that little glimmer of hope. That being said, there was also a part of me that was incredibly burned out from the whole manifestation journey thus far. And in hindsight, I could see exactly why things were not working out for me. I realized that most of what I had been doing was suppressing my emotions. I see now that there was a lot of spiritual bypassing and spiritual gaslighting, a lot of toxic positivity, and it led to a massive, massive burnout. So I had this confliction where on the one hand, I did start to feel a little bit of hope again, and his teachings were really genuinely resonating with me. So many of the things that he taught were things that I had always wondered about. I had always had questions about these things, and he was answering them. It felt like it was finally making sense. On the other hand, I was also in a place where I was incredibly jaded, exhausted, and truly ready to give up on the idea of manifestation entirely. Nonetheless, I continued to pour myself over his books and his lectures and everything I could get my hands on. And at that time, back in 2015-16, there were not a whole lot of resources on YouTube or TikTok. This was years before Neville's explosion in popularity. So you really had to go to the source. You had to go to Neville himself to learn and understand the law of assumption. I did also pick up books by Joseph Murphy after I learned that he and Neville shared the same mentor, Abdullah. So for the next couple of months, I just absorbed everything that I could learn and find and get my hands on, until I finally got to a point where I had to stop and say, okay, Missy, you've read more than enough. You have a grasp and understanding of this law and how to apply it. Now it's time to apply it. It is time to put this to the test, because that is one thing that Neville would constantly tell people to do. And so I started doing just that. I started to apply the things that he was teaching. And first I wanted to start with smaller things, so-called insignificant things, just to get myself out there a little bit, just to move a little bit further into these waters. Nothing of huge significance, nothing that I held a lot of resistance to. I started by things that were simple. I wanted to manifest a free gift, whether that was a free meal, a free cup of coffee, it could be anything. But I wanted to receive a gift for no specific occasion, but just for the sake of receiving a gift. I wanted to manifest a blue butterfly, a real one, not a picture or a video, but an actual butterfly. Where I was living in the city at the time, I did not see butterflies very often, so it would have been something that would be a little harder to chalk up to coincidence. And I also intended that I was going to hear from an old friend that I haven't talked to in a very long time. Didn't have anyone specific in mind, but this was purely for the sake of seeing what would happen. And looking back now, I can see that one thing that I did have to my advantage was that I was also still very jaded. After years and years of the law of attraction and hit or miss and the mixed bag results, I was still a bit skeptical as to whether or not any of this was actually real. And so I didn't really have any attachment one way or the other. I truly could not care less. I just said, all right, Missy, probably not really going to happen anyways, but we're just going to put it out there and see what happens and see how it goes. And then I went about the rest of my week, and by the end of that week, I manifested that free coffee, not once, but 3 times, all different circumstance and completely unrelated. I not only manifested that butterfly, but I actually had it land on my hand and on my shoe which was absolutely wild. I had never had that happen before. And I had 2 people reach out to me that week, one from high school and one that I had not spoken to since way back in middle or even elementary school. So needless to say, I was pretty taken aback. I was still a bit skeptical. I remember thinking, okay, this could still very well just be random coincidence, but it definitely had me perking up a little bit. And so I continued to put this to the test. I continued to try it. The next thing I did was Neville Goddard's ladder technique. And I actually made a video talking about some of these earlier manifestations, and I go into more detail about them. So if you want to check out that video, I'll leave the link to that guy up here and also down below. But needless to say, over the course of those months, my faith started to grow exponentially. And I kept raising the ante higher and higher each time, making it a little bit bigger than the last. In this time period, I had manifested so many incredible things. I manifested a free car, brand new. I manifested my dream apartment. I manifested more work and more money coming in, more abundance. I manifested better health. I manifested resolution. So many incredible things happened in this time period, and my faith started to take off. I had manifested all of these amazing things. I had seen so many things and had so much success that it was becoming increasingly more difficult to believe that this could be anything else. This had to be from me. This had to be a product of my creation, my selection, what state I was selecting and occupying. More and more, my logical mind was having difficulty in trying to rationalize how I could be having all of these so-called coincidences. But despite all of that, despite having a number of successes and increasingly growing faith, things really came to a head when I was on my own SP journey. After I found out about the law of assumption and I had been putting it to the test and I had been studying it and testing it for several months, I started to think more about the big things in life. What did I want to experience as a whole? What about the things that were of significance to me? And that naturally included my love life, my partner, who that would be, what that would look like. And I decided ultimately that even though it had been a long time since my person and I had split up, I knew that that was my person. I knew that that was the person that I wanted to be with, that I wanted to spend my life with. They were my other half. So after giving it some thought and some reflection, I decided that I wanted to go all in on manifesting my person. And I did not know what I was getting myself into. Whew. And I have made a video talking about my SP journey, what that entailed, what that experience was. You can check out that video up here. I'll also leave that one down below. But that experience was what really pushed me to the most transformative shift that I have ever had. Because like most people, I struggled with my SP. It felt like every deep insecurity, every fear, every doubt, every little last button was pushed and ignited. Even though I had already seen significant proof of this law, even though I had already had so many things that I could not really chalk it up to coincidence, I still found myself racked with fear, racked with frustration, constantly looking for validation, constantly looking for confirmation, all the things that I knew was not the approach to take. And I talk about this openly on my channel because I think it is important for people to see that I struggled too, that this was not an easy journey for me whatsoever. I think a lot of times when we're isolated on this journey and we don't have people to talk to, it's easy to perceive things as being easier for other people, or, oh, they must have had some kind of advantage. They must have had something going for them that made it easier for them. I can say for myself that that was certainly not the case. This shit was hard. There were countless moments where I wanted to give up. I wanted to say, I'm done with this. I can't do it anymore. There were many tears and frustrating days, many times that I would punch and scream into pillows. I questioned, I doubted constantly, and was succumbed by so much fear. Because growing up, that was all I knew. To say that this was easy would be the furthest thing from the truth, especially where I started when my self-concept was through the floor. I thought so low of myself. And it's weird to talk about today because it feels like a whole different person, but that is where I was. It really forced me to take a hard look at who I was identifying with, what I was identifying with, who I was being, my thoughts, my beliefs, all of it. That SP journey forced me to take a solid and honest look at what I was still holding on to, what I was still believing, what I was still responding to and reacting to, what story or narrative I was continuing to accept as true for me. And that was the epiphany that I had after several months of unsuccessful chasing and trying and constantly looking for validation, getting frustrated with myself, questioning all of this, everything that I had learned. Maybe it was all just coincidence. Maybe none of this is real. Maybe this is all bullshit. It all came to a head one night when I had the epiphany that has changed my life. And that realization was this: there is no one to change on the outside. And what I was doing and how I had been approaching my person was trying to change him, focusing my attention on him and what he's doing and what he's thinking. How's he responding to me? And judging everything from that, instead of remembering that this is about self. This is all the reflection of self. That as long as I was continuing to look at this through the lens of trying to get him to change and fixating on all the things that were wrong and that I didn't like and that I didn't want, and continuing to do the same thing, expecting different results, was not the take. It was not the approach. I had to shift my focus. I had to shift my entire perspective. I had to see things through a whole new lens. Because at the end of the day, it was not about him. It was about what I was believing, what I was perceiving, and what I was assuming as true. And I thought to myself that night, who is Missy Renee? Actually, who is Missy Renee in the context of this desire? How would that version of Missy Renee be reacting and responding to this situation? I knew that that version of Missy Renee felt trust, felt secure, felt confident in herself, felt loved and adored and prioritized, and knew she was the prize, knew that there was no one out there that could compare. And that version of Missy Renee knew her worth, knew who she was, and was not afraid to be true to herself. Once my perspective changed, everything started to change. I started to imagine that I was now, in this present moment, the person that I wanted to be, and truly let myself feel that I am this person, that this is now me, that what I am imagining in this moment is a state that I've selected. I've selected this reality. I feel it in my body, in my soul. Therefore, it is done. Because at the end of the day, I was the one who was choosing in every moment. Whether we're conscious of it or not, we are always making choices in every single moment. We are choosing and deciding what we are experiencing, how we are interpreting it, how we are perceiving it. In every moment, we are deciding, we are selecting, we are choosing the reality of experience. And definitely check out the SP video if you want to learn more about what I did specifically to change that old conception and that old story. But within a short time, within a matter of days, I noticed myself feeling like a different person. I felt lighter. I felt calmer. I felt relaxed, at ease. It felt like everything was coming together. Even though I couldn't see it, I had no proof of it, it was a knowing. It was as someone or something much greater than myself was saying, relax, Missy, got this. And I believed it. So within a couple days of that epiphany, I noticed a massive change in how I was feeling. And then I started to notice that the people around me were showing up differently. I noticed that my luck seemed to be turning around. I noticed that people and circumstance were showing up to support me. Things just had a way of working themselves out. If ever there was a problem, I didn't panic. I didn't react. I just felt, it's okay. We've got this. And it would work itself out every time. Sure enough, many of you who have seen my SP story, he did come back. And that was 6 years ago? Almost 7 years ago. Damn. And we're still going strong. And he is still by far my most favorite person on this entire planet. He is my other half. He is my support, my encouragement. He is my best friend. And since then, things have only continued to grow and expand in the most incredible ways. I can say now with no hesitation that I am a completely different person, that my life is radically different from where I was all those years ago when I was desperate and struggling and hopeless, and every day was a pit of despair, and I thought there was no hope. I was all but on the verge of giving up entirely. I still feel that peace. I feel that sense of trust within myself, within my highest self, within God, the Creator, who is my own wonderful human imagination. And with God, all things are possible. Just recently, I've manifested my beautiful home that is everything that I have dreamed of, everything that I've wanted since I was a little girl, living in a part of the country that is breathtaking, that I've always wanted to live in, deep in nature and the wilderness and the trees and the animals and the peace and quiet. And I have dedicated myself and my life to spreading these teachings, to spreading the word to anyone who will listen, that you who is watching this are the sole creative power in your experience, in your reality, that you are not at the mercy of your circumstance. As dire as it may seem, as hopeless and bleak as it might look, you have the power within you to change your life in all of the ways you desire. I have manifested so many incredible things over the last handful of years. But nothing is more significant and powerful than the change that has taken place within myself. For the first time in my life, I can say that I am at peace, that I feel assured. No more anxiousness, no more depression, no more constantly sabotaging myself, bringing myself down, no more low self-esteem, low self-worth, insecurity. My life and everything in it has made a complete 180 in the most spectacular ways possible. And the entire reason I felt important to make this video is so that hopefully for some of you that are going through a difficult time, struggling with doubts, frustrations of your own, battling your own fears and demons, for those of you, know that you are not alone in this. That no, it's not always so easy to manifest. No, it's not always something that we can just snap our fingers and get over. For some of us, it comes with great struggle, and you're not alone, you're not broken, and you're not different or an exception somehow. This might sound like the most cliche thing in the world, but if I can do it from where I was, feeling lower than dirt, if I could overcome and transcend my limiting thinking, my old beliefs, my self-sabotaging patterns, if I can do it, I promise you can do it as well. The last video I'm going to link to is my 3 fundamentals, which are the 3 most important takeaways of all of this. And if we can grasp these fundamentals, if we can understand the foundation to all of this, and get rid of all the other noise and all the other fluff, and break it down into 3 pieces that we can easily digest and understand, you can take the same approaches and the same steps that I and many others like me have taken to radically shift our lives. Because if despite the circumstances, despite the hardships, despite the limitations, despite the lack, despite the wavering, the self-doubt I had, despite the hundreds of times that I wanted to quit and almost did, my life has changed in the most incredible of ways. And I wake up every day so incredibly grateful, so incredibly thankful that despite all of it, despite the times that were so difficult that it almost broke me, where I am now is exactly where I've always wanted to be, who I've always wanted to be. And I give thanks for that every single day. Know yourself. Know who you are. Know who you are really. You are not your limiting beliefs. You are not your intrusive thoughts. You are not your fears. You are not your doubts. You are so much bigger than that. And once you know this, once you understand this, that is how you're going to transform your life and everything in it in the most miraculous and wonderful ways possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it entertaining. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in any of my other resources, such as my coaching programs, my workshops, my blog, my podcast, my social links, got a ton of resources down in the description box, so don't forget to check that out. Also, be sure to check out the other videos on this channel. Be sure to check out my Manifestation Fundamentals playlist. Each video is a different topic, but it all talks about how to manifest the best life ever. So until next time, all you lovely people, please take care, be well, and never forget how powerful you truly are. Happy manifesting, guys.